one of the one of the rising stars here at OSU. So it's really my pleasure to have him give a talk about his research to the community. So thank you, Scott.
Yep, thanks, John, for that nice introduction. Can I just ask, can you guys see my cursor if I move it around?
Yep, they can.
Okay, good. Okay, so thanks for having me today. Today, I'm going to talk about some of my work examining modifiable health variables, particularly cardiorespiratory fitness, is where some of our early research has focused on, but then also additional aspects of kind of modifiable health attributes and fitness attributes, looking at strength and gait metrics. So just a quick outline, I'll briefly go over cognitive and brain aging effects that we see in the literature, and then I'll talk about modifiable attributes in cognitively normal adults, turning to some multivariate assessments of health metrics and cognition in older adults with mild cognitive impairment, and then transitioning to some of our works in progress, some of our projects we have ongoing here at Ohio State. So for those of you that may not be familiar with the aging and cognition literature, there is a pretty marked and consistent decline across the lifespan, across multiple cognitive domains. So these are two larger studies that have been reported by separate groups. And in both cases, on the y-axis, we have z-scores, and on the x-axis here, we have age groups. And you can see that for multiple cognitive tasks, there's a decline across the lifespan, all right? And that's also consistent in these data reported by Salthouse and colleagues, where again, you see decline across multiple cognitive tasks across the lifespan. The one exception is where you see these lines that are not only increasing or at least maintaining stability throughout the lifespan is semantic memory. So that domain refers to your kind of memory for facts or world knowledge, and that is more resistant to age-related decline than other cognitive domains like episodic memory, executive function, processing speed. You also see differences in age-related brain decline. So here we have cortical regions, primary visual cortex, and lateral prefrontal cortex. And within these different brain regions, we see different patterns of decline. So in these data, on the y-axis is brain volume, and on the x-axis is age, going from 20 up to 80-something years old. Each one of these points represents the same individual scanned 5 years apart. So in this case, we have someone that's roughly 20 years old, scanned 5 years later, and you can see that in this particular individual, there's some decline. But when you look at across the group, primary visual cortex is relatively stable across the lifespan. That's in contrast to lateral prefrontal cortex, which is a region that's important for executive functions, where you see pretty obvious decline across the lifespan in lateral prefrontal cortex. The same is true within regions of the medial temporal lobe. So these are a region that's important for episodic memory. That's your memory for events. It's a region, brain regions that are often implicated in Alzheimer's disease. And even within the medial temporal lobes, you see differences in kind of the effects of aging. So in entorhinal cortex, it's relatively resistant to age-related decline. But in contrast, the hippocampus, you see that there's a pretty obvious pattern of decline across the lifespan. So the point I'm trying to make here is that there is variability in cognitive performance across the lifespan with aging, as well as individual differences within brain regions and their response to the effects of aging. I also want to give some exemplars of individual differences in brain imaging metrics, just to kind of drive this point home. So here we have FDG PET scans of a 75-year-old. This is panel A, who has mild cognitive impairment, amnestic syndrome. That would be considered the precursor stage to Alzheimer's disease. And you see some reductions or some hypometabolism in the brain. And in comparison, you have a 71-year-old cognitively normal individuals. These regions here represent metabolism. And you can see that there's greater cerebral metabolism in the cognitively normal individual relative to this panel A brain. Similarly, if we turn to T1 weighted images, which we have here in panel C and D, we have two individuals that are the same age, 71 years old, one with Alzheimer's disease. So you can see marked atrophy, particularly here in the medial temporal lobe. So this would be where your hippocampus is, kind of right where my cursor is here on the left and the right. That's in contrast to another 71-year-old who has much less atrophy, and you can see their hippocampus is much more well-defined and obvious on this coronal image. Over here, we have a 71-year-old, and here we're looking at amyloid PET imaging. So this is tagging amyloid in the brain. And so in this case, you do not want brighter colors, you want kind of darker colors. And so this image here in this E panel is showing, is tagging significant amounts of amyloid. And that's in comparison to a 93-year-old who has essentially minimal, if amyloid in their brain. So again, just kind of making the point that there are significant individual differences in brain aging. We also see that in terms of kind of physical performance and across the lifespan. So there is variability in aging from a fitness perspective. And here are some just, kind of pictures or maybe some stereotypes that people have of aging. But you also have individuals who are highly performing and probably performing better than many of certainly better than me on some of these races. So just for example here, if any of you are familiar with running, this is a 70-year-old who ran a 10K in 44 minutes and 25 seconds. That's about a 7-minute and 9-second pace for 6.2 miles. That comes out to, here we have an 87-year-old woman that's doing the long jump. She long jumped 8 feet and 11 inches. So this is someone who's running as fast as they can, leaping and falling into a pit of sand at 87 years old. So again, the point here is there is marked variability across the lifespan and various aspects of functioning, whether that's cognition and brain health or physical performance. So one of the goals of my lab and one of my primary interests is looking at ways to impact cognitive and brain aging, identifying modifiable variables that are positively associated with cognitive performance and brain health. And here is an example. So here we have cognitive function, and here would be years. And these are kind of example trajectories of kind of aging. And then in terms of neurodegenerative disease and Alzheimer's or dementia, you kind of have this preclinical phase, then you can transition to mild cognitive impairment, and then ultimately dementia. And so what my research focuses on is what's the best way to keep people on this kind of like healthy aging trajectory and delay or avoid this trajectory of mild cognitive impairment and dementia as long as possible. And the advantages of this is if you are successful, you can have a significant impact on patient quality of life by optimizing their function prior to death, reduce caregiver burden, impact on healthcare systems, as well as the economy. So before I turn into some of my specific research focus, which is episodic memory, I just want to make the point that there are multiple memory systems. I'm just going to talk about two here. So one, both of these fall within the domain of declarative memory, but one of them is called semantic memory. This refers to your world knowledge, facts, concepts, relationships. So for instance, you know that Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States, but you probably can't tell me where or when you heard that information or when you learned that information. So it's thought of as content-based acontextual retrieval. That's in contrast to episodic memory, which refers to your memory for events. It's often referred to as mental time travel because you can place yourself back in that situation and phenomenologically re-experience that event. And it entails the retrieval of content information as well as contextual information, so spatial information, emotional information, temporal order information. So just to give some dramatic, kind of real world examples, if you look at this picture here and you look closely, you can see that this gentleman is missing half of his front tooth. And so in this particular case, I can go back to my wedding reception and I can see the best man from my wedding doing the worm across the dance floor and then chipping his tooth on the hardwood floor and watching half of his tooth fly across the dance floor. I'm also able to remember the time that my wife and I took two of our daughters to an amusement park. One of the daughters, the youngest one, Kira, wasn't feeling well. So my wife took Kira back to the hotel, leaving me with the older daughter. I decided, like, hey, why don't we go on a roller coaster? And she was up for it. But if you look closely, this is the look of fear in a young child. Luckily, she recovered. There's no ill effects. This was a few years ago. And then, she did recover nicely. Later in the day, my wife, Dr. Jasmeet Hayes, came back and we took her and our other younger daughter on the bamboo shoot. And then, despite the look on Kira, this is our youngest face. Both of the girls actually liked the ride, so there were no ill effects of this roller coaster ride with Dad when Mom was not around. And then just to get, we also have a third daughter to make sure she gets her timed in the show that I've learned. Now we go on, just merry-go-rounds with Dad and not larger roller coasters. So, and also to get our youngest Talia in the presentation. Okay, so anyhow, the point is episodic memory, each one of those events, I can kind of relive them, re-experience the event. Those are dramatic examples. More common, mundane examples would be what you had for dinner yesterday. You should be able to place yourself back in that situation, relive the event, think about who you were with, what you had for dinner, things like that. Those are more kind of day-to-day typical examples of episodic memory. My work focuses on ways that cardiorespiratory fitness can have an impact or is associated with episodic memory and cognitive function. And so just to make sure everybody understands what cardiorespiratory fitness is, I have a kind of formal definition here. It's also referred to as aerobic fitness, but the important thing is it's modifiable via physical activity, and common ways to do that would be walking, jogging, swimming, or cycling. So why cardiorespiratory fitness? There's certainly a relatively established animal literature pointing to the hippocampus, episodic-like memory, and Alzheimer's pathology. So there's work showing that physical activity increases nerve growth factors associated with angiogenesis, neurogenesis, and synaptogenesis. There's work showing that physical activity decreases amyloid beta, which is a biomarker of Alzheimer's disease, in rodent models of Alzheimer's disease. And physical activity has also been associated with better performance on hippocampally mediated memory tasks, like the Morse water maze, for instance. So in my work, I wanted to look at the relationship between cardiorespiratory fitness and episodic memory. We used several visual episodic memory tasks. So the Wechsler memory scale FACES task, a brief visual spatial memory test that's essentially presenting an array of line drawings to a participant. You take the stimulus away, and then you give them a blank piece of paper, and they have to draw the figures and their locations. And then we also gave them an experimental face name relational memory task. So they would get a face presented with a name, and they had to rate how well that name went with the face. Then there was a delay, then they would get the face, and they had to decide which name went with the face. So on these tasks, we saw an age by fitness interaction. And you can see that in these scatter plots here. So we have young adults in the orange squares, older adults in the blue circles. On the y-axis, we have a visual memory composite score from those neuropsychological data. And on the x-axis, we have age. And you can see there's a positive association between cardiorespiratory fitness, or peak VO2, and episodic memory performance in the older adults, and we do not see a relationship in the young adults. We also see that same pattern for the face name memory task. So no relationship in young adults, but a positive association between cardiorespiratory fitness and episodic memory performance among the older adults. So one question is, well, what's the extent to that cardiorespiratory fitness might eliminate differences based on age? So we did a median split of the older adults based on whether or not they were high fit or low fit. And you can see here that the high fit older adults shown here in gray are performing more closely to the young adults shown here in blue compared to the low fit older adults. But it's not as though that high fit, high cardiorespiratory fitness eliminates an age difference in episodic memory. We've also done some work using this task while doing functional magnetic resonance imaging. You can see here, these are brain regions showing a positive association while participants learn the face name association. And these scatter plots here are different brain regions that are showing a positive association between peak VO2 on the x-axis and fMRI activation on the y-axis, including the thalamus and the hippocampus, which again, that's a region that's critical for episodic memory function. We've also done diffusion tensor imaging scanning in young and older adults. And here we also see this age group by peak VO2 interaction, looking at white matter microstructure. So FA is here on the y-axis. That stands for fractional anisotropy. That's an indicator of white matter integrity. And on the x-axis, we have peak VO2. The older adults are, again, the blue circles. The young adults are the orange squares. And you can see in the older adults, there's a positive association between cardiorespiratory fitness and white matter integrity for multiple brain regions. We also did a median split with these data, and you can see that in some of these white matter tracks, there's no difference in white matter integrity between young adults and the high fit older adults shown here in blue. And the low fit older adults shown here in green are the group that's showing a significant decrease or significantly lower white matter integrity compared to the young adults and high fit older adults. So some brain regions, cardiorespiratory fitness does reduce that or eliminate that age difference with young adults. But certainly the more common pattern was this more stepwise, where the high fit older adults had greater white matter integrity than the low fit older adults shown here in green, but not equivalent to the young adults shown here in orange. We've also looked at T1 weighted images, specifically cortical thickness. So you can process T1 weighted images. There's software called FreeSurfer that will automate the segmentation of the different like gray matter and peel surface shown here in red, and the gray matter and white matter boundary shown here in yellow. And then you measure the difference between those two lines across these various vertices. And that's how you get your cortical thickness measure. And what we saw in our study with young and older adults was that older adults classified as high cardiorespiratory fitness have greater or thicker cortex than low fit older adults. And these are different brain regions that are plotted over here on the x-axis. On the y-axis is cortical thickness. And you can kind of see that pattern of young adults have the greatest cortical thickness, followed by high fit older adults, and then low fit older adults. There are a couple brain regions where there's no difference in cortical thickness between the young adults and high fit older adults, but in general, this is the more consistent pattern, this kind of stepwise pattern. Okay, so to summarize these data that we have with cardiorespiratory fitness, among older adults, there's individual differences in cardiorespiratory fitness, and those are associated with episodic memory performance, fMRI activation during an episodic memory encoding task, white matter microstructure, as well as cortical thickness. And these data are consistent with the notion that there may be some age dependence in the relationship between fitness and cognition and brain health. And it could be that young adults are at their lifetime peak for cognitive and brain metrics, and that they may need some time for kind of the the effects of poor fitness to manifest in terms of showing a relationship and seeing some associations there. And then I just want to be clear that I'm not suggesting that cardiorespiratory fitness or exercise is a cure for age or Alzheimer's disease related decline, but age-related decline or Alzheimer's disease progression could potentially be mitigated by maintaining higher levels of cardiorespiratory fitness. It's likely that this would be specific to a particular cognitive domain or task, and as well as specific to particular brain regions based on those differences that we've seen in our data. Okay, so now I want to transition to one of our more recent studies where we looked at multi-domain fitness and cognition. So I just want to point out that there are multiple types of fitness similar to cognition. So there's cardiorespiratory fitness, musculoskeletal strength, musculoskeletal endurance, balance and coordination, flexibility are all different domains of fitness. It's similar to cognition in the sense that these domains are not process pure. They share variants, but they are unique constructs. Each of these domains show evidence of linking to cognition and risk for dementia. So there's a literature showing gait speed and how that's associated with risk for dementia, similar with cardiorespiratory fitness, similar to strength. And so one of the things that I'm interested in pursuing is identifying which fitness metrics are most important for cognitive and brain health. What are their relative contributions to cognition in the brain? And to what extent are fitness cognition relationships domain specific? So we are making progress to address these concerns. So, these interesting questions. And this is a study that I'll go over briefly that was led by Jessica Stark and Kelly Hershey. Kelly was an RA in my lab at the time. She's now a graduate student in Zeynep Sagan's lab in the Department of Psychology, and Jessica is a fourth-year grad student in my lab. So here we focused on modifiable fitness variables and cognition in Black older adults. There's differences in multiple cognitive and health domains across different racial groups. And this certainly justifies attention to diversity in our research samples. And I'm pointing out some of the folks who I think are kind of leaders in this domain. Certainly this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are people who are on my radar in terms of this topic area. And so for this particular study, we wanted to consider the unique contributions of education, which is a proxy for cognitive reserve. It's often a variable of no interest or a control variable, but it certainly warrants attention in the context of health disparities research. And so here we examine multiple physical fitness variables simultaneously to examine the collective contribution to cognitive performance and the relative importance of each one of those types of fitness and their associations with cognition. And in this particular study, we saw that executive function was associated with physical fitness. So here are the results. Jessica and Kelly did a hierarchical regression approach. And you can see here, after they control for age and sex and enter education, well, in this particular model, the second step, they enter education into the model, and that was significantly associated with executive function performance. So that's what you see in this scatter plot here. So executive function is on the y-axis, years of education is here on the x-axis, and you can see that education accounts for about 17% of the variance in executive function performance, and that did significantly improve the model. In step 3, if we had a composite measure of fitness, and again, that composite measure is covering multiple components of fitness, it does significantly improve the model. It accounts for an additional 5% of variance. And here you can see the relationship between that composite fitness Z-score and executive function performance. So we also examine the relative importance of these modifiable fitness metrics for executive function in Black older adults. So instead of using the composite score, we looked at the relative contributions of body mass index, grip strength, walking speed, and max puff. And this is the percent of response variance it accounts for. These individual variables account for after accounting for age, sex, and education. So you can see that of those fitness variables, max puff, which would be a proxy for cardiorespiratory fitness. So that's essentially where you hold a little device and kind of breathe into it as forcefully as you can. That's what the max puff score represents. So that accounts for the most variance of our kind of physical attributes that were available in this particular study. So to summarize, in this kind of sample of Black older adults, physical fitness and education were associated with executive function. Proxy of cardiorespiratory fitness was the most important predictor of performance, followed by gait speed. Modifiable variables can account for as much variance in cognition as age. So just as a comparison, so we are showing you age, sex, education, body mass index, grip strength, walking speed, and max puff. Again, that's the proxy for cardiorespiratory fitness, and kind of seeing the relative contributions to executive function performance. And you can see that education and max puff account for a similar amount, if not more variance than age and executive function performance. In this particular study, we didn't see physical fitness associated with episodic memory, but they used the verbal episodic memory task. So it's a little bit different than some of my studies where we looked at visual episodic memory and found that association. In some of my studies, we didn't see an association with verbal episodic memory. So it could be that cardiorespiratory fitness or physical fitness may be more sensitive to visual episodic memory performance. And the other thing I'll note too, it could be due to limitations of the assessment. So this was an epidemiological studies. These are just kind of quick measures that can be collected in research participants' home. And it's certainly not the gold standard assessments of fitness in terms of looking at strength, cardiorespiratory fitness, and gait speed. Okay, so now I want to turn to some multivariate work that we've done looking at health metrics and cognition. I'm just going to kind of highlight one of the study, our more recent studies. So this was again a study led by Jessica Stark, and which Kelly Hershey also contributed to. And this was recently accepted for publication in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. And what Jessica did was a multivariate analysis, partial least squares regression, where she looked at multiple kind of predictor variables. And then the outcome variable was slope of change in episodic memory over 2 years. And then she ran another model where she looked at slope of change in executive function over 2 years. So again, one of the strengths of this study is the variety of metrics that we're looking at here. So multiple metrics of cardiometabolic function, multiple stress and inflammatory markers, growth factors, as well as AD biomarkers, in addition to kind of demographic variables like age, education, as well as ApoE4 status. And so for both of these models, the predictors were the same for the episodic and executive function model. And so here are the variable importance metrics. But the main thing I want to point out is, like, if the particular bar graph exceeds a value of 1, it indicates that that particular variable is important in predicting the slope of change in episodic memory. So we have IL-6, a marker of inflammation, as well as multiple CSF markers of Alzheimer's disease, and education is also contributing to the episodic memory model. When we turn to the executive function model, we see similarly that the AD biomarkers are important in accounting for change in executive function over 2 years. But then for executive function, we also see some of these cardiometabolic variables like blood pressure, cholesterol coming online is important for prediction. All right, so in terms of the goal or the next steps, I essentially wanted to kind of build on some of our work with cardiorespiratory fitness, some of our work that we've done with, kind of looking at multiple attributes of fitness, but also take into consideration biomarkers and other variables of interest. So like sleep, nutrition, social engagement, just to name a few variables that have been associated with maintaining cognitive and brain health across the lifespan. And one of the goals, long-term goals that I have for my lab is to identify what are the most important modifiable variables for slowing cognitive decline. I discussed this with a colleague and decided to incorporate mental health and TBI assessments. So this is Dr. Jasmeet Hayes, who's also a faculty member in psychology and a core member of the CBI initiative. And so I want to turn to some of our works in progress that we have and focus on, share some information about the FASTER study. So this is a fitness, aging, stress, and TBI exposure repository. It's a joint collaboration between my lab, the Buckeye Brain Aging Lab, and Jasmeet's lab, the Mindset Lab. We have started data collection. We've got 84 participants and counting. We're targeting a sample size of 300. And the idea is to get a comprehensive snapshot of cognition, brain health, fitness, mental health, as well as additional kind of domains like sleep, nutrition, things like that, and see what is going to be most predictive of cognitive and brain decline over the lifespan. And so I'm going to walk you through our methods. So it's a comprehensive study. So it takes about 16 to 18 hours of appointments, baseline assessment, to work through these various assessments that we're doing. And that's broken up into 4 appointments that are range from 3 to maybe 4.5 hours or so. And so for appointment 1, the participant comes in, we do neurocognitive testing. This would be traditional neuropsychological assessment. That takes about 2.5 hours. And then we do kind of a low intensity fitness assessment. So we do the short performance physical battery. We do gait and balance testing with accelerometers. So I have examples here. So we use a system called LegSys and BalanceSense. So for the gait tests, they have these accelerometers strapped to their legs, and we can get sophisticated spatial temporal gait metrics like gait speed, swing time, stride length variability, stride length variability, swing time variability, etc. And then we can also, we put an accelerometer just around their hips, and we can get kind of sway metrics when they do the balance tests. And then they also do a 2-minute walk test. We do some kind of assessments of gross motor response time and a vertical jump. The fitness part takes about 1 hour. The neuropsych takes about 2.5. Appointment 2, they come back for more neurocognitive testing. This time we're doing the NIH toolbox with them and some experimental cognitive neuroscience tests. That takes about 1.5 hours. We do a whole body DEXA scan with bone density. That takes about 15 minutes. And then we do progressive graded maximal aerobic exercise test on the cycle. That takes about 1 hour. So we do this over at PAS, which is about 150 yards from the psychology building. They've got the DEXA scanner there. Here's an example of what the visual output of the DEXA scan looks like. And again, a cycle-based test for peak VO2 assessment. For appointment 3, they come in, they do their brain MRI. We collect just about any imaging sequence that our scanner here in the psychology building can collect. So T1 weighted, T2 weighted images, diffusion tensor imaging, ASL for cerebral perfusion, resting state functional MRI to look at neural networks and functional connectivity, as well as task functional MRI. And we are using the Human Connectome Project aging sequences. We're also collecting a high-res medial temporal lobe scan so we can look at hippocampal subfields, and that's what I'm kind of showing you up with this image here. And here's an example of, diffusion sensor imaging data. After the MRI scan, we do another fitness assessment. This time we're focusing on strength and power. So we do vertical jump on a force plate, 1 rep max chest press and leg press. For appointment 4, we do a blood draw. This is so we can look at biomarkers and polygenic risk scores. We do a clinical interview, structured clinical interview for DSM-5, clinician administered PTSD scale, Boston assessment of traumatic brain injury, as well as the vestibular oculomotor screening. And these other appointments, we also are administering a variety of questionnaires to assess physical activity, nutrition, subjective assessments of cognition, sleep, and more. They wear Actigraph GT9X for a week so we can get objective metrics of physical activity and sleep. And then after they do these 4 appointments, they can elect to come back for feedback if they want, where we will give them feedback on their performance for the cognitive testing, fitness testing, body composition, and sleep. And I just want to highlight that that's, I think, a very unique aspect of this FASTER study that Jasmeet and I are doing. Typically, studies with humans, in particular, older adults, you do the testing with a participant, pay them, and send them on their way. For this study, I feel like the experience is mutually beneficial in the sense that they're helping us understand, volunteering their time and helping us address questions that we're interested in, factors that accelerate age-related decline, like post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, lack of sleep, and things that are protective against cognitive decline, fitness, physical activity, nutrition, things like that. But they're also getting individual feedback on how they're doing at this particular time. So how they're doing on their cognitive performance, what are their fitness levels like, how's their sleep, and so I think it's the participants we've tested so far seem to be quite happy with their experience. We've had multiple participants referring spouses and family members, even sons or daughters or moms and dads, depending on the age, to participate in the study. So it's been a really nice experience from that standpoint, not only addressing the questions we're interested in, but giving the participants something that they're highly interested in too. And then the other thing I'll note is that we give them in terms of compensation. They can choose to elect money or a 3D print of their brain. And I just want to note, yes, we were first to do it at Ohio State, and yes, it's an awesome idea. So about half of the participants actually elect to have a 3D print of their brain. They really like it. So if you want to keep your participants happy, if you want them coming back for your study, which is what we're doing for this study, we want to bring people back for annual assessments and follow them over time. Certainly, I think a 3D print of the brain is a nice way to do that. In terms of our sample that we have so far, we work with the Ohio Senior Olympics. That's something that's a relationship I established upon arriving here at Ohio State. They're a great group to work with. I'm thankful for the experiences that we've had with them. We go to the track and field events as well as the pickleball events each year. And certainly among the older adults we've tested so far, some of the most eager volunteers have been some of these senior Olympians. We've had success running some ads on Facebook and have a significant wait list for this study. So we're trying to work through that and get people tested as quickly as possible for moving forward with our data collection. In terms of our data that we have so far, so we've tested 83 participants We need to work on enhancing the diversity of our sample. That will be a major focus for this upcoming year. I'm hiring additional staff so that we can enhance the diversity of our sample. And then in terms of the breakdown within different age groups, the younger adults, being on a college campus, they're always the easiest to recruit. But we certainly have a lot of older adults that are willing to participate. This is just where our data collection is at this particular point in time. And we are seeing some relationships that we would expect in the sense like so this is just a preliminary look at the data. We have on the x-axis here, peak VO2, so cardiorespiratory fitness, and their performance on that visual spatial episodic memory task. And we do see a positive association between cardiorespiratory fitness and visual episodic memory. The other thing I'll note, I know we're getting reasonably close to the end of time, is we do have some studies looking at the acute effects of exercise on cognition. And this is a study that's led by Michael Melville, who's an undergraduate in the lab. He's been doing a really great job. He's received some awards at CBI Research Day for his poster presentation, as well as summer support from CBI. So certainly CBI has played a large role in his success as an undergraduate. And he's being mentored by Jessica Stark and me, of course, but Jessica is helping him with some of the day-to-day statistical analysis. So they've been a good team and are pulling together a manuscript looking at the acute effects of episodic memory and executive function. Just to orient to this task, each participant comes in for 3 different appointments. For their appointment, it's either a control condition where they just sit on the exercise bike. For another appointment, they'll come in and they'll do light intensity exercise where they're pedaling on a bike, and we track heart rate to make sure they're staying in the prescribed range. And then they come in for another appointment where they do vigorous intensity exercise. These are counterbalanced so that the order is different for each participant. Then they get a 5-minute rest, and then we do our cognitive testing with them. And so just to summarize quickly some of Michael's data, we do see a significant effect of acute exercise on mind wandering or sustained attention. So here, if you look at D prime for the control condition, they are showing greater discrimination for the light and vigorous intensity exercise conditions. And if we look at their error rates, they have fewer errors in the light and vigorous exercise intensity condition compared to the no exercise or the control condition. So again, mind wandering or sustained attention inhibitory control improved after exercise. We found that light intensity exercise was sufficient to observe exercise-induced cognitive benefits, and there was no difference in behavioral performance between light and moderate vigorous intensity exercise. So I guess the take-home message there is if you want some acute effects of exercise in terms of enhancing cognitive performance, light intensity is sufficient. You don't have to go into the moderate or vigorous intensity exercise range to see some positive benefits on attention. I've also done some real-world application of these acute bouts of exercise on attention and performance. So Barbara Finese published a study in 2018, Sweat So You Don't Forget, where they looked at exercise breaks during a videotaped college lecture. And they found that 5-minute exercise breaks during these videotaped lectures were more likely, the students were more likely to be on task. They had better subjective ratings of narrator clarity and better performance on multiple choice exams immediately and 48 hours later. And so those data, they did a nice study. They compared performance for the aerobic exercise condition versus a break where the participants played video games or the lecture as usual. So I thought it was a nice study with a very solid design. So I implement this in all the classes that I teach here at Ohio State. We take 5-minute exercise breaks. I've done it in my health psych class, which has included 80 undergraduate students. as well as my cognitive aging course that I've taught 3 times. That usually has about 20 to 40 students, graduate and undergraduate students. And it really boils down to breaking up students into groups, 3 to 6 students per group, depending on the size of your class. They come up to the class, that group will come up to the front of the class and lead the class through an exercise program for 5 minutes. They design the routine, they get to pick the music. And so that's just kind of one of the applications of research that I've done in terms of my teaching. And if you're wondering what they think of it, so this is from the course that I taught this semester. They just completed a voluntary and anonymous survey, and I asked them about, did they think that the exercise helped improve their ability to pay attention? And you can see that most agree or strongly agree. The same goes for helping with engage their peers in the class, whether or not they found the breaks enjoyable. And I think this is interesting in the sense that compared to other classes without exercise break, did you prefer this lecture format with exercise breaks? And you can see that the majority of them are either neutral, but certainly a majority prefers that format. So just something for those of you who teach to keep in mind. And then finally, I want to talk about a study that we are implementing where we are doing brief acute bouts of exercise while we're collecting functional MRI data. And so I say, AKA the death of me, because this will either be a very large waste of my time or kind of one of the coolest things that I do in my career. Because most brain imaging studies, they collect data while the person is physically resting, of course, because you want to minimize the amount that that person's head is moving while you're collecting your imaging data. But I have interest in at least getting their bodies to move while trying to keep their brains still, because acute exercise may reveal blood flow abnormalities not identifiable during physical rest, similar to a cardiac stress test, right? So if there's some concerns about a cardiac condition, often those aren't observed at rest, which is why people do or refer for a cardiac stress test. And so we're trying to assess the feasibility of this approach and identify exercise-induced changes in the bold signal or fMRI activation. And so we kind of have a setup here where a person, that's me actually in the scanner, pushing on pedals, trying to increase heart rate and respiration while we're collecting functional MRI data. And so we have some preliminary data. We do see some associations between exercise and fMRI activation during these tasks. And we're hoping that we can publish a feasibility study from that. We've had multiple people working on this study. Kelly Hershey, Alex Hasselbeck, and Jessica Cloud is a graduate student in my lab who's kind of leading the charge now to kind of move this project forward. Other projects that I have going on, we're looking at some ketogenic diet interventions to enhance physical and cognitive performance in Army Reserves. This is in collaboration with Jeff Volek. He's the PI. He's certainly the driving force behind these studies, and my role is to help with the cognition and brain imaging aspect of it as well. And Bill Kramer's a part of this too, in exercise science. So we have funding from the Department of Defense for this particular project. We also have another project that's funded to look at the role of a ketogenic intervention for enhancing mood and cognition in Ohio State undergrads. And that's in collaboration with some other faculty here at Ohio State. Dan Murfeld I'm collaborating with him to look at the links between age, vestibular function, balance, cognition, and falls in healthy older adults. Again, my role on that is kind of helping with the cognitive aspect of that project. Some of the long-term goals for my lab is really to develop a precision medicine approach for cognitive and neurodegeneration, kind of optimizing diagnosis and prognosis in aging and brain injury populations, optimizing an intervention based on an individual's profile, so what's often referred to as attribute by treatment approach. So whether or not someone would be more appropriate for aerobic versus resistance or mobility training or combined, and also considering nutrition, inflammation, immune function, microbiome, and sleep metrics. And really trying to individually tailor treatment recommendations based on these comprehensive health and lifestyle profiles that we have for individuals, as well as looking at mechanisms underpinning exercise effects on cognitive and brain health. And here's the requisite jokes for the end of the talk, I guess. I actually think this one on the right is pretty funny. And then I just want to acknowledge my funding support sources. NIA, the CBI has been a big supporter of my work, as well as the stuff that is funded in collaboration with Jeff Bolick, the Department of Defense. And then certainly want to acknowledge my collaborators, those folks here in terms of the OSU collaborators: Bill Kramer, Ann Cluse, Deb Kegelmeyer, Jimmy Onati, Emily Martini, Jeff, Dan Murfeld have been great collaborators, and certainly been a big part of my research program since my arrival here at Ohio State. And then, of course, my lab, we've got one of the picture here. They have played a big role, obviously, in the data collection and data analysis too. So thanks, that's all for me. If there's any questions, happy to answer them. Oh, I see there's a question here. Let's see.
Yeah, we can also allow people to, if you want a question and ask live, you can raise your hand and we can get you to ask. But I can read the question too. So looks like a question is: have you or other research investigated the effects comparing with other forms of exercise on cognition and aging, for example, strength training or yoga?
Yeah, so I don't think there's too many head-to-head comparisons of like aerobic training versus strength training versus a control condition. Oftentimes there's strength training versus a control, or say a combined strength and aerobic training versus control, but pitting specific like exercise modalities like aerobic versus strength. I haven't seen too many studies that have looked at that or taken that particular approach. And there's certainly yoga, studies that have looked at, relationships with cognition and brain health as well too. So I think probably what's lacking is maybe a multi-arm, RCT comparing those different things. But I will say, one of the things that I've found interesting from the exercise intervention studies is oftentimes if, say, they're doing aerobic intervention where they're having older adults start a walking or jogging program, and then the control will be flexibility and they call it flexibility and toning, where they just have them doing light weights and working on stretches. Oftentimes in that control condition, you'll see changes in peak VO2. And I think that's watering down some of the effects that we see of exercise on cognition and brain health, because we're changing one of those potential variables of interest, or that we think is driving changes in cognition and brain health. So I think that's an important thing to think about when you are looking at the exercise intervention literature, is also looking at the control condition. It's almost as if we're doing, we're losing some power because we are getting that change in the control condition.
Any more questions out there? You can raise your hand and ask, or you can type in the Q&A. Scott, I have a question. One of the things that has always interested me about the aging studies in connection with good cognition and mental health is, and the ones that live for a long time as well, is this connection to a healthy immune system. Is that something that you've come across at all? Though, those that are fit also have good immunity.
I think that's a great question. I think that would be like, I think there's likely a relationship there in terms of linking kind of fitness, immune function, cognition, and brain health. I haven't seen too much on that front. I think that would be like a rich area to pursue, and a fruitful one to pursue. And I'm actually have a meeting at noon with Baldwin Way, who's kind of interested in immune function, has done some work with humans and things like that, to talk a little bit about that. And I certainly think that would be a fruitful research area to pursue. And happy to talk more about that. I know you guys have
for sure
for that too.
Yeah. Let's see, Kadar, are you seeing anybody with hands up?
Don't have any questions pending right now. Okay, now I do.
Okay, good.
Okay, can you hear me? This is Dana.
Yep, we got you, Dana.
Hey, Sky. Hey, I had to miss the first part of your talk, so I apologize if I missed this part, but I'm just curious, has your work looked at anything related to nutrition and brain aging and brain performance? I know it's another huge area.
Yeah, so I have not published anything with nutrition. For our FASTER study, we have like a food frequency questionnaire that participants fill out. There's certainly a literature showing that nutrition can have a positive impact on cognition and dementia risk. When people ask me about nutrition in terms of like, oh, what should I do? I tell them, look at these different diets that have shown evidence of potentially reducing risk for dementia. So there's the Mediterranean diet, the MIND diet, the DASH diet, even the keto diet. And so I tell them to look at that profile of like, okay, what does that nutrition plan look like? And then whatever one they think they could be most successful at, that's the one I tell them to go. So
I wonder if at some point it'd be interesting to, like, if you have like high performers and lower performers in your different groups, to kind of at least get some, I don't know, some like, how often do you eat at, fast food joints, or just some kind of thing to see if you could tease it out a bit.
Yeah, I'm hoping that with our FASTER study, where we have that nutrition questionnaire, we will be able to like tease some of that stuff out.
Yeah, all right.
It's a great question.
I know, and I know it's a huge issue, hard to track. So, but yeah, all right.
I mean, it also links to John's question. So with the nutrition and fast food and inflammation and immune function, like there's a web there.
Yeah,
that's very interesting to look at. And we do have some, we are doing a blood draw, and Jasmeet and I have our list of like, kind of markers, which include inflammation markers that we have in mind. But yeah, I think those are very interesting. Both of those are interesting.
Are you looking at CRP as one of the inflammation markers?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, perfect. That'd be good. All right.
What about neurofilament? Is that one you're going to do?
NFLs, I think that might be Jasmeet's favorite, but yes. Yeah.
Or GFAP? Do you look at GFAP also?
I think that's one on our list. And I think that one, I don't know, just if Jessica Stark, my grad student, is here, I think that came out. We did a multivariate analysis, and I feel like that might have been one that came out in one of her studies.
Yeah, good. Okay, very cool work. I love it.
Thanks.
I'll ask another question if there isn't one. So Scott, we all know that your last slide was exercise. Does it, when you consult with these individuals, does it matter when you start exercising? Meaning, like, is there a time when, like, if you haven't exercised your whole life and then you start exercising later in life, is there any protective value, or is it people that have to exercise their whole lives to have this sort of protection?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the lab right now, we're kind of struggling with, because what we want to find is a nice lifetime physical activity questionnaire. it's not trivial. The one that we have identified is not a trivial amount of time. And in the context of having people already spend like 16 to 18 hours with us, it feels like a lot. So we're trying to think about, like, for annual follow-up, maybe we'll spend that time with like a structured clinical interview to assess lifetime physical activity. That is a great question. I don't think there is great data out there distinguishing like current physical activity versus lifetime physical activity. I certainly think that's an important question to get at, and one that I'm interested in. It's just the quick survey lifetime physical questionnaire that we found is targeted specifically towards women, and so it misses some of the stereotypical male sports like, football, for instance, or wrestling. And so we're trying to figure out, should we just try and adapt that questionnaire to be relevant for males too? But it's a great question, and I think it's an important one too.
Yeah, it's like anything. There probably is that, and I hate to use the term critical window, but there's a critical window probably when those things have benefits, and then if you start and you already have a bunch of problems, you're probably not going to do a whole lot.
I do know that when they do exercise interventions in sedentary older adults, they do see positive impacts on cognition.
So any bit of exercise helps no matter what. That's good.
Yeah, typically a lot of the current exercise intervention studies screen out people who are physically active because they want to see the most potent like treatment effects, which makes sense, but that's where the literature is right now. I don't think I've seen a study where they take people who exercise like twice a week and have them exercise 5 times a week and do you see a benefit then? Mm-hmm. Most of the studies I'm familiar with, they exclude people if they exercise more than 30 minutes a week, so that they want them sedentary and you can get the most potent like treatment effects, but they do show effects. There's debate about that. Certainly, more recently, there was a recent meta-analysis suggesting that, physical activity maybe doesn't have positive impacts. Again, I attribute part of that to like, there are studies where you see in the control group an increase in cardiorespiratory fitness. I've always been fascinated about like what's driving that increase. Is that once you get some older adults up and like stretching, to now in their free time, do they start walking more? And so that's what's bumping up their cardiorespiratory fitness. But anyhow, I think that's one of the reasons why maybe there's you might see a study that doesn't have effects, or I think that control group is important to keep in mind.
Okay. All right, last chance for anybody to raise their hand or type a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, this is Juliana Nemeth. I'm over in public health. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. Scott, I'm in the Division of Health Behavior and Health Promotion. So a lot of the modifiable risk behaviors that you're looking at, including exercise, obviously are the leading modifiable causes of premature disease and death, and oftentimes are fueling health inequities. So I appreciate the fact that you're considering health disparities and health equity, giving a nod to that. What I was wondering is, in your work, I kind of look at it from totally the opposite standpoint. So I'm looking at populations that are experiencing some of our worst disparities. And one of the things that I really consider is the role of trauma across the life course, not just physical violence for sure, but other kinds of trauma across the life course and environment. So what's happening in households, in neighborhoods, in communities that are impacting outcomes as well. And I'm wondering if you're collecting any of that kind of data with any of your participants in terms of trauma across the life course or environmental factors that could be impacting kind of the outcomes that you're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of trauma, there's, this is Jasmeet's wheelhouse for sure. But we do the PTSD, like the CAPS, and I don't know if they do the PTSD checklist as well. But that has a lifetime component to it in terms of like PTSD. And then in terms of like the broader, I mean, this came up and really popped more on my radar after seeing some recent stuff at CBI Day, and it had been on my radar for a while, but Barb Benlin at CBI Research Day talked about the area deprivation index, and I think we can easily implement that into our FASTER study in terms of looking at kind of like access to resources and air pollution and things like that, which can also have an impact too.
Yeah. Thanks so much for what you're doing.
Thanks. I appreciate the question. Yeah, I didn't really actually mention this. The talk was running tight on time anyway, but there are data showing that like you can reduce risk for dementia by up to 40% by addressing the various modifiable health factors.
Which is great because it doesn't take a whole lot really to meet those metrics without being very taxing. I mean, everybody wants a magic pill.
Yeah.
Which I guess they're getting now in the diabetes drug that everyone's taking.
That'll be interesting. Yeah, that'll be.
And okay, well, I guess thanks again, Scott, for a great talk, and thanks everybody who attended here today. And enjoy the rest of your day and weekend. Looks like Columbus is a nice day, but our weekend's gonna be cold, like usual. Everybody else have fun, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for having me.